Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Tien, the Future of Governance lead here at Restate. We wanted to actually kick off our session today with a short little video about the toolkit, the Future of Governance toolkit.
What do you imagine is the future of governance? Throughout the last century, technological developments have led to economic growth and social progress. However, these advancements in technology have also exacerbated a host of global challenges, leaving us feeling collectively exhausted and even hopeless. Many attribute our problems to an unwillingness to come together and make decisions. In other words, it looks like governance is the problem. But at Restate Foundation, we see glimmers of hope. All over the world and throughout time, communities have been experimenting with novel governance practices that emphasize the value of love, plurality, and justice. These communities have found ways to effectively invite participation, to leverage their collective intelligence, and overcome seemingly insurmountable social, political, and economic issues at local and international levels. It is clear the future of governance is not only in our imaginations, it is being built right now. Restate Foundation welcomes you to join a collaborative effort to shape the future of governance together. Introducing the Future of Governance Toolkit. A collection of innovative, diverse governance use cases from both the physical and virtual worlds. We invite you to browse and contribute to our living library of methods, tools, results, and insights. This toolkit is for visionary communities to learn about and share their experiences with participatory governance models. It is for those who see the potential of shifting power into their wider community. It is for those ready to rise up as leaders to transform governance and make it part of the solution instead of adding to the problem. Are you ready to join us in co-creating the future of governance?
Great. I hope you enjoyed that video. So, as we ask, are you ready to join us in co-creating the future of governance? As a team, we've studied over 100 unique use cases of innovative governance from around the world, both online and on the ground. Our research has revealed a common emphasis on participatory methods, where members of the community contribute their voice and their actions to together compound their shared economic, social, and environmental prosperity. Each use case we've collected is a story of how a community solves a problem by using participatory processes that express the values of love, justice, and plurality. Many have developed tools and frameworks and would like to share their learnings with others. So that's why Restate's building our Future of Governance Toolkit. We want to help with this knowledge management, with the goal of communities using this platform to find, share, and co-create the future of governance. So today, I just want to share a very quick lightning presentation of 3 use cases, just to give an example of why we're so hopeful about the future of governance. So, first example. One of the biggest challenges we've heard from communities around the world is the challenge of defining cultures and values. So here we're inspired by what Wikipedia did. So the Wikipedia community in the Dutch and German Wikipedia community decided that they wanted to leverage artificial intelligence for their content moderation. Now, normally AI is based on a centralized data set and is only reserved for the most technical of members to be able to engage with it, and is usually full of a lot of bias and other shortcomings. So what the Wikipedia community did is they used these model cards to be able to understand as individuals how the AI would actually perform against their agreed upon values. And what they could do with this is then gather as group, as a community, to decide what do they actually want that AI model to look like as a collective. How do they actually want the AI to express their collective culture? This process has allowed the Wikipedia community to make the AI more transparent and aligned, a big challenge that we're seeing in the world today. Another big challenge that communities face is figuring out how to manage resources. It can be really difficult to balance equitable distribution of resources while encouraging community members to take agency in decision-making. As Vitalik Buterin actually mentioned earlier, Gitcoin DAO is a super interesting example of how to do this. So Gitcoin DAO, they use this method called quadratic funding, where each dollar is allocated by a fund that is calculated according to the curve on the left, or on the right. So you can see that every dollar that an individual donor adds is actually worth less in a way. And so in this way, if one donor donates to one project 100 million dirham, that project will actually earn less funding than a project that has 10 donors donating 10 million dirham each. In this way, Gitcoin DAO is able to actually amplify more the number of people who vote for a certain concept as opposed to just the amount of money that one person gives to the concept. Moreover, they use and make visible all transactions within the blockchain so that others can see what all the transactions are, regardless of their position in the DAO. Another struggle that communities face is how to make decisions when there are big disruptions, such as COVID-19 and new technologies. So normally, what happens when a new technology enters, our legislators kind of quickly try to learn about it, and then they try to make some policies around it. When Uber decided to enter the Taiwanese market, the Taiwanese government decided to try something different, something they called digital deliberation at scale. They use this tool called Polis. They used a process called V-Taiwan, and they leveraged the knowledge and capacity of their civic technologist group called GovZero. And they created a process whereby actually almost 5,000 people together deliberated, designed, and passed new policies. So through this process, by including more voices, the Taiwanese legislature had an easier time passing these policies with very little negative feedback. I don't think that happens often all the time. So by studying these and over 100 other inspiring examples of participatory governance, we've discovered some patterns. We identified dozens of processes, and we have grouped them into what we call the restate governance stack. The governance stack can be split into two types of components: pillars and emergent. Most communities focus only on these three pillars. In our future of governance examples, however, we see communities leverage the emergent components more intentionally. This helps actually build the pillars more sustainably and regeneratively. Each component of the governance stack is associated with some processes that you can see on the right that could be each more or less participatory in and of themselves. So to further refine our toolkit, we're currently interviewing visionary governance practitioners around the world, including private and charter city leaders, public officials, grassroots activists, and DAOs and online communities. We ask each of our interviewees about what they believe is the future of governance. We think it's critical because, as the late Nobel laureate Ilya Prigogine said, we have much more to fear from a lack of utopian visions. What we do today depends on our image of the future, rather than the future depending on what we do today. Thus, I have a little bit of a participatory exercise, since we're talking about participatory governance, where I'd like you each, I think many of you are already on your phones, so if you want to take your phone out and scan this QR code, we have a little fun exercise. Scan it, or you go open up your web browser, go to www.menti.com and enter the code 15520205. And there you'll see our one question for you today. What do you imagine is the future of governance? And as you think, I'll hand it off back to Mark and also go to the back end to help get that slide up so we can actually see what your responses are. Thank you.
I'll give you just another moment to go ahead and finish that code. This is vital for when we finish up today, because we will see what your word or term is for the future of governance. You've already taken the first step in participatory governance. This is a similar tool that they use in the toolkit of the future of governance. It's where everyone can participate and have their voice heard, have a seat at the table. So it's important that we get that out there. I'd like to invite the panelists up to take their seats. Start first with Nila Losk, the wonderful ambassador at large and person representing the digital affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Estonia. And if anyone has been keeping up to date on Estonia, we will know that they are running the forefront and have for quite some time the future of governance and digital nomads and the e-residency and many, many other things that we'll probably hear glimpses of here today. And so we want to know how that's going. Welcome, and please just relax. This is great for all of us. We're going to have a great time. The next lady I would like to invite up is Rachel Cook. We're going to do ladies first. Rachel Cook is the CEO and founder of Seeds. We're going to hear more about Seeds and co-founder and CEO of Seeds. For those of you who have heard anything about Seeds out there, it's a decentralized autonomous organization that's doing very wonderful things to make sure we get the funding in the right spots for the future based on donations and other things. But I'm not going to ruin it. I'll let Rachel get the specifics there. Very excited to invite John Dennis Liu to the stage to take his seat. He is not only a good friend of mine, but he has been doing this for well over 30 years, and I hate to call him the father of restoration, but he documented one of the biggest restoration projects in our world in China in the Loess Plateau. And he sits as the founder of the ecosystem restoration camps, 60 camps throughout the world that are restoring our world from the degradation that we have caused. So I'm so lucky to have him here. And I will sit myself to everyone else, and we'll get started on this. Just a little bit about me. So if you haven't heard who I am or what I've done or why I'm here at this crazy, I'm a regenerative futurist and an ecological economist. And you'll say, what in the heck? Who is he? I've never heard of him. This hairy guy. I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto for the United Nations. And the reason I wrote that is a lot of us have no clue who the Sustainable Development Goals are for, why they were created, what it is, where it's going. And the manifesto is a way for us to visualize what that future come December 2030 will look like. And then besides that, I sit with Dr. Abir Haddad, who's up here in the front of the audience, on a wonderful group called Resilience Frontiers. And many of you probably didn't know that there are goals, targets, and indicators, and a roadmap and a path towards 2050. From December 2030 to December 2050, there's going to be other goals and other pathways to move forward, and that's called the Resilience Development Goals or Resilience Frontiers. It's the thoughts and the processes that can get us to think about the future of governance, get us to think what the tools and the kits and the methods and the thought processes we need to get us from today to those hopefully regenerative, desirable futures and put humanity on the right side of history. So that's just a glimmering of what I do and why I'm here, to really get an insight on these wonderful people. Thank you, I'm good. So, Rachel, I want to start with you, ladies first. You were here for the previous session, you were here at the beginning of the video. I want you to basically describe and give us a kind of a short introduction of what you've accomplished so far with Seeds. You've been doing this for some time, and how you see it ties to this future of governance, participatory governance, and some of the tools that you're using or seeing emerging in what you do.
Sure. So Seeds is like cryptocurrency mutual aid, and the idea is that instead of the zero-sum extractive economic system that we currently exist in, through Seeds, through decentralized technology, we can all build abundance through giving within our ecosystem. So I think the way that that intersects with this idea of participatory governance has to do with my belief that we need a separation of money and state. And that is an idea I've seen discussed in a lot of circles, specifically a separation of money and centralized governments. When we're living in centralized governments, as all of us are, at varying levels and to varying degrees, our contribution to those economies typically has to do with having a job. And we talk about job creation. There's not a lot of questioning whether or not we should even have jobs. I think jobs are going to go away. And we're going to find ourselves in positions in which jobs don't exist for people, but people still need to eat, of course. They still need to have their basic needs met. And so we're going to have alternate models that don't fit within this sort of centralized silo like thing that we're forced into from the time we start, going to school up through till the time we die. We're trapped in this system. So through Seeds, anyone who wants to is able to redeem a single seed, our cryptocurrency for social good, to ask for help. So say you needed $1,000 to cover your rent or something. You could redeem a seed to ask for that. We'd share that with our global community. They can all contribute to your need. Say Mark gave $25 towards your need. He'd receive $25 worth of seeds in thanks. And in that way, when and if seeds go up in value, and they've gone up like 100x since March 2020, of course it's not guaranteed that it's going to continue at that rate, but that means that Mark then has $2,500, which, because he's a generous person, he's probably going to want to reinvest in helping other people. So if we design an economic system in which you can ask for help and you're rewarded for giving, that's a better economic system, I think, than the one that we've all grown up in. And that's what Seeds does, and we've helped people in need in 29 countries and counting to date. And the other thing that I think is exciting to me about it by design is that, statistically speaking, many of you know that women tend to be more likely to give. In this way, it's women, people with feminine energy of all genders, who are more rewarded and are building more wealth by design because they're giving. So we don't have to have these conversations about like, how do we get more women in STEM, or like, how do we get them to take this certain job track, if it's just working with the way that people, feminine people, are already oriented and are behaviors that they're already engaging in. And there's just something about that idea of kindness being the generation of currency that just makes things very different than what we're kind of stuck living in. So that's the work that we're doing, and that's the future that I see. I think these centralized governments aren't going to sustain. The energy just isn't there to support them in the same way. COVID showed us that in many ways. So I think a lot of these systems are just going to fall. We don't have to do much. I think it's just going to happen. So we should shift our energies into more regenerative types of economies and governance models, like I think we're doing with Seeds.
Thank you so much. So we are seeing a huge uptake in new economic models, the word regeneration last year in May at Davos at the World Economic Forum. I heard it about every 1 minute at least twice by so many heads of state that I had to think, do they understand what regeneration is? But it's not a buzzword. It's actually something that's very old, and it's a very old model. It's been around for more than 500 years. Leonardo da Vinci was the first scientist and polymath to write about regenerative economies, regeneration, how things work, how the world works. And so I appreciate that. We've got Neela, the ambassador here, who is kind of, have you all been with Estonia from the beginning of the trends with the e-residency and also the moving forward of governance?
Yes, but e-residency was actually not the beginning. It was already, I would say, the culmination of some developments that we had already done by that time.
Are you also seeing these trends moving forward, or this new reach for new governance systems, new models, new ways of operating that not only are participatory, allowing digital nomads, allowing people to get residency all over, but this trend that people want more control of the systems that govern their lives?
Yeah, I actually had a sort of starting perhaps from more this global context where we currently are, because what I see in my everyday work as working in a foreign service, but also around the world, that we see actually this growing distrust towards technologies, but also towards governments and also towards private sector. So we had quite a, let's say, positive, I would say, session, but actually there are quite many concerns behind it. So from this point of view, technologies allow us to win, and Estonia is definitely one of these countries that has won from this cross-border use of technologies. Estonia has become bigger than actually its size, and is known for many of the world digital innovations. But on the other hand, there are also a lot of risks that come with it. So I would say that what I see is that governments are really seeing more their role nowadays as a regulator, and not perhaps anymore that much as a communicator or facilitator of the dialogue or participate in a dialogue, but they have really moved to the position of the regulation, with the hope of starting to restore this trust. That is actually sort of the base for having this dialogue between government and the people. But we don't believe, at least in Estonia, that this is enough, because trust is an emotion, right? And you build this emotion through practice and through good practice of using technologies. So from this point of view, I don't see any other option in a way for governments than still, on the one hand, yes, to make sure that people still feel good and safe in this virtual world, that they know that perhaps the data is not being stolen and sold and so forth, or that the kids' opinion is not shaped by any other actor you do not want it to be shaped by, but you still embrace and take risks to innovate and use these new technologies to reach out to people. And I think finding that balance is something that currently I think society struggle with.
I want to dive just a little bit deeper. You say you're dealing mainly with regulatory and kind of the framework, and how do you govern and manage that and kind of monitor that system so that it's going in the direction that you want. What are the struggles that you're seeing, and how does that apply to kind of this general move forward for the future of governance, participatory governance, other models that we're seeing emerging and being discussed on a global level?
Mm-hmm. Okay, when we take sort of this geopolitical level of digitalization, then definitely at least countries in the European Union are going quite a bit towards regulative position, in addition to what we have seen here. But this does not mean that the innovation is not taking place. And I was before asked to think of what could be the lessons, let's say, from Estonia, and I definitely would say that I wouldn't, in a way, separate these participatory forms of governance from general digitalization. We believe in a way that as everybody is using technologies, they're also comfortable with government or being involved in government, but it's not actually so. People are not, in many countries, used to communicating with the government, with sort of authorities via digital means. And I think it's really a must. It is a basis to create that habit. And this is something that sort of puts the base also for participatory sort of governance in Estonia. But second, we have talked quite a bit of different tools and possibilities, and then often when a new tool comes out, then we are again disappointed, so there were not enough participants and so forth. But what I believe is more important is actually to build the system of transparency, and in this sort of ecosystem, give people possibility. I think there was a gentleman that mentioned that both the legislative process, policy-making process, should be open for everybody to participate on a regular basis, which does not mean that everybody will immediately do it, right? We all have our own life and worries, but the principle that the opportunity is there is important. And in 2011, I believe, Estonia gave this possibility. So we opened the legislative process and policy-making process also for people, and puts them in the same level of other government organizations. So you can really monitor the entire legislative process from the beginning until the end, and you can comment. There are no votes, of course, in this legislation making, but you can comment similarly to other ministry, and your comments need to be responded, and so forth. So these systems should still be there, and I don't see any other way to sort of move towards this trust building that is very much hampered by these fast-moving technologies.
We see a lot of new civilization frameworks, some new models, some new systems emerging globally. NEOM, BEDZ, MASTAR projects. We see all different forms of new civilization frameworks emerging, and those who are in existence. We're in Dubai at the World Government Summit. Obviously, they're really concerned about the future and that they're prepared for that future. John, you kind of take a different way historical view of all this, and I really want to get your input because you've been at this over 30 years. You've seen the creation of entirely new economic models. We sit on different boards at the United Nations, and we've heard these conversations about the future of governance, of what are the systems that work. In what your experience is, and especially with the ecosystem restoration camps, can you kind of give us your insight of what you think that we're struggling with, and how we could use these participatory governance tools to move forward, and that would actually help us in what you've done and what you've seen?
Well, I guess one thing I would say is that there are obvious structural errors inside of existing governance systems. So those are viewable from the fact that large numbers of people around the world have no rights whatsoever. And how is that possible? So we can see and we know what happened to those people's rights. I mean, someone dominated their country through military things, or they extracted too much and destroyed the ecology, and people had to flee because they could no longer live there. And then, of course, there are people all over the world. So what we've seen in the ecosystem restoration camps movement, I mean, first of all, by learning that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, it became for me a kind of responsibility, because I mean, nobody talks about this generally speaking, and that's going to determine the future for all life. And I covered the rise of China from poverty and isolation as a journalist. I covered the collapse of the Soviet Union as a journalist. I covered all kinds of international terrorism and so on. And when I looked at the ecology of the Earth in comparison with the geopolitical, economic, and cultural changes, I realized that the ecology is more important. Ultimately, nobody will remember the Soviet Union. Nobody will remember any of the governments, any of the corporations. Nothing matters if we don't have functional hydrology, if we don't have functional fertile soils, and if we don't have biodiversity. And that's not even getting to the point of the huge amounts of toxicity which have been spread all over the world. So if governance is failing completely to focus on these things, I mean, we've had 27 COPs to talk about climate change, and if it only takes one to say, hey, this is an existential threat to human civilization, so governments are failing to do this. So what a strange thing happened to me, I was having dreams that people could do this by themselves. And I couldn't get the dream out of my head, so I wrote it down in an essay, and it was published. And then thousands and tens of thousands of people began to say, well, that's what we want to do. We have to do that for our children and for others. So this is a choice. It's an intention, and it's a shared intention. So when you have this possibility, because it doesn't, you don't need permission to restore the earth. We have to restore the earth. And if the government is unable or unwilling to do that because they see or believe that they have other reasons, but there will be no government, there will be no economy if we don't restore the ecological systems. So the people chose to do this now, and we've been building ecosystem restoration camps and communities now for 6 years, and there are 60 of them all over the world. And we're able to work in Somalia and Egypt and Guatemala and Brazil and Ecuador and Thailand and Philippines and all over the world, the United States, and I mean anywhere. And because it is just something that is common to all cultures.
And how is that seen from the governance side of things when all of a sudden you've got 60 camps restoring nature and environment? Is it seen positive as a help for those governments, for those areas?
I think so. Most of them, I mean, they all have some sort of legal structure within their countries. They all are working as public-private partnerships because the governments and the international agencies and regional, local governments, the elders, the youth, basically everybody, when they understand what they're trying to do, they have this shared intention. They want this for themselves, they want this for their community, they want this for their country, and ultimately we all need this as humanity for the earth. So that's a place that discusses what brings us together, not what separates us.
So in 2 prior sessions, a friend of mine who was sitting up front as well, Val, spoke about the big gap between consciousness and technology, where we're going. There is a ecological phenomenon called symbiosis that is the fastest growing innovation our world has ever seen. When we live in a symbiotic earth, and when we have that symbiosis in our governance and in our future, we can keep pace with that exponential growth of technology and shift our consciousness. Our human health really is a microcosmos of the health of the earth around us. And so as I wrap up our panel, because we're out of time, I want to ask you all the most vital burning question. What does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And just to set up where that comes from, it's something we've been practicing for a long time. It's over 50 years old, comes from our Buckminster Fuller, who did the World's Fair geodesic dome in 1967 or earlier in Montreal, Canada at the World's Fair, and had the New World game where he says, what does a world that works for everyone look like without the ecological offense to anyone or anything on this planet? So I'd like to wrap up with your personal view, and maybe even Seeds and Estonia and Ecological Restoration Camp. What does a world that works for everyone look like for you, Nelly?
With one word, I would put shared.
Great. Joe?
Well, I think it's one that recognizes the difference between abiotic systems and biotic systems, and understands what are primary and what are secondary systems.
Great.
Fuller has a quote that I like to use a lot that I'll paraphrase poorly, with this idea that the way to affect change isn't to fight the existing system, but rather to build a new system that renders the old system obsolete, which is sort of foundational to what Seeds is doing. But relating to consciousness, I think raising consciousness is where we need to go, as we talked about earlier. In our case, if someone has received 2 gifts through Seeds, before they receive a third, we ask that they either give forward a third of what they've received to other people in need, or they sit a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation course, because I've found those, I've done 23-ish or something. That's made me much healthier than anything else I've been able to find. So it's that idea of, if we're raising consciousness individually, as was said earlier, then that will raise the consciousness of Earth, and the systems we make will also be healthier and more improved. So I hope that we can move in that direction.
Wow.
And that would work for everyone, because we would be organizing ourselves in ways that were more symbiotic. We'd be behaving in healthier manners for everybody, I think.
That's so beautiful, and thank you for all sharing your ideas and your thoughts towards the future of participatory governance and what a world that works for everyone look like. I believe a lot more people are going to be asking that question, and whether the current systems and governance systems that we may in this room be working on, how can we make those work for everyone, all of humanity, for a much brighter future. Thanks to Restate Foundation, a lot of Restore on this panel, and the World Government Summit. Thank you very much.